And we continue on page 16. Intuition versus sensation. The person who has a natural preference for sensation probably describes himself first as practical, while the person who had a natural preference for intuition probably chooses to describe himself as innovative. In temperament shorthand, the sensation preference is designated by S, the intuition preference by N, the first letter of intuition. I cannot be used since that letter denotes introversion. 75% of the general population reports a preference for sensation, while 25% indicate a preference for intuition, by Bradway of 1964. Looks like the boat scared the birds. All right, sources of misunderstanding. Although extroversion and introversion are important differences in understanding ourselves and others, especially others we live with, these preferences are minor compared with sensation and intuitive ways of thinking about things. The two preferences of sensation and intuition are, of any of the preferences, the sources of most miscommunication and misunderstanding, vilification, defamation, and degeneration. This difference places the widest gulf between people. It is the difference, in fact, that Kretschmar saw so clearly as schizothymia versus cyclothymia. Oh my goodness. The schizothymes intuitives were understood in terms of sensitivity and insensitivity, awareness and unawareness, while the cyclothymes, the sensibles, are understood in terms of happiness and sadness, optimism and pessimism. For Kretschmar, this was the fundamental dimension of human difference, while for Jung, it was merely one of four bases of difference. The sensation-preferring or sensible person wants facts, trusts facts, and remembers facts. They believe in experience, and they know through experience, which is history, both personal and global. They might be described as earthbound, as grounded firmly in reality, anchored to earth, a terrestrial. When a sensible talks to people, they are interested in their experience, their past. For example, if a sensation-preferring employer interviews someone for placement, he wants to know what experience the applicant has had. This is important to this employer because if an applicant has had experience, the employer feels he has a sound basis for decision. The intuitive preferring employer, on the other hand, is likely to have confidence not in what the applicant has done in the past, but in what the applicant verbalizes about the future of the organization, what he would do in a hypothesized situation, what he might see as a possibility for growth for the organization, or how he would propose to handle a given problem. The sensation types notice the actual and want to deal with that. They focus on what actually happened rather than worrying too much about what might have been or what will be in the future. These people remain in reality and, when work is the issue, tolerate no nonsense. They usually are accurate in observing details. Perhaps because when a sensible type approaches something, his eyes tend to pick up a specific element. This is quite different from the intuitive, who, when entering a situation, seem to scan, glance, radiate at things and people, at times aware only of that which is related to his current preoccupation, missing details noted by the sensible. The kind of language which inspires the intuitive has no ring to the sensible. The intuitive finds appeal in the metaphor and enjoys vivid imagery. He often daydreams, reads poetry, enjoys fantasy and fiction, and can find the study of dreams fascinating. The intuitive acts as if he is an extraterrestrial, a space traveler, engaged in exploration beyond the realities of the present and the past. The possible is always in front of him, pulling on his imagination like a magnet. The future holds an attraction for the intuitive, which the past and the actual do not. But because his head is often in the clouds, the intuitive can be subject to greater error about facts than the sensible, who pays better attention to what is going on about him. For the intuitive, life is around the bend, on the other side of the mountain, just beyond the curve of the horizon. He can speculate for hours about possibilities. He operates in future time, sees around corners, and knows out of the out of the unconscious. The intuitive sometimes finds complex ideas coming to him as a complete whole, unable to explain how they knew. These visions, intuitions, or hunches may show up in any realm: technology, science, mathematics, philosophy, the arts, or one's own social life. Of course, people who prefer sensation have hunches also, but they do not pay much attention to them. And after several years of ignoring their intuitions, not acting on them, and not trusting them, the intuition is heard as mere static. The penalty one pays for ignoring that inner voice is that it diminishes. The penalty paid by those who prefer imagination, the intuitives, is that if they ignore reality too long, they end up out of touch with the realities of their environment. The intuitive lives in anticipation. Whatever is can be better or different, and is seen as only a way station. Consequently, intuitives often experience a vague sense of dissatisfaction and restlessness. They seem somewhat bothered by reality, constantly looking toward possibilities of changing or improving the actual. The intuitive can skip from one activity to the next, perhaps completing none. Jung, in 1923, described the intuitive as one who plants a field and then is off to something new before the crop is even beginning to break ground. Instead of staying around to see his vision come to fruition, he is off looking for new fields to plow. Others can be left to reap the benefit of the intuitive's past inspirations. Thus, to the sensible, the intuitive frequently appears to be flighty, impractical, and unrealistic. The intuitive, on his part, at times views the sensible as plodding and exasperatingly slow to see possibilities in tomorrow. The difference between intuitives and sensibles is most noticeable in their attitude about child rearing. The intuitive parent, especially if augmented by an intuitive spouse, is likely to worry if the child doesn't spend much time daydreaming and fantasizing, and is not captured and intrigued by the more fanciful tales and myths. It is as if such parents want their offspring to develop their imaginations by utilizing them daily. Nothing is more valued by the extreme intuitive than a vivid imagination. In contrast, A sensible parent becomes concerned should the child spend what seems an inordinate amount of time in fantasy. One must develop one's usefulness. The child should spend much of his time outdoors playing, practicing, and when older, working. Cue words. Careful listening to one's own choice of words may demonstrate how each person verbalizes his preferences through choice of vocabulary and through intonation. One very often transmits one set of values over another. People who prefer sensation, S, for example, tend to value experience and the wisdom of the past and want to be realistic, while the people who prefer intuition, capital N, tend to value hunches and a vision of the future and are likely to be speculative. The S person depends on perspiration, where the N person is more likely to depend on inspiration. Words such as actual, down to earth, no nonsense, fact, practical, and sensible are music to S people. Words such as possible, fascinating, fantasy, fiction, ingenious, and imaginative are apt to light the eyes of capital N people. The next category is thinking versus feeling. Persons who choose the impersonal basis of choice are called the thinking, capital T, types by Jung. Persons who choose the personal basis are called the feeling, capital F, types. Both of these ways of selecting what to do or not to do are necessary and useful. It is a matter of comfort. Some people are more comfortable with impersonal, objective judgments and uncomfortable with personal judgments. Others are more comfortable with the value judgments and less with being objective and logical. The more extreme feeling types are a bit put off by rule-governed choice regarding the act of being impersonal as almost inhuman. The more dedicated thinking types, on the other hand, sometimes look up the emotion-laden decisions and choices as muddle-headed. Each person is quite capable of both types of decision. It's rather a matter of preference. Sources of misunderstanding for the thinking versus feeling people. More women than men, 6 out of 10, report that they prefer deciding on the basis of personal impact, capital F. And certainly there is cultural sanction on this type of behavior on the part of females. More men than women, 6 out of 10, report that they prefer to make decisions on the basis of principles, that is, logically and objectively. Thus, more men prefer the thinking and more women feeling. Although the sex difference is relatively minor and gives little edge in predicting behavior, the capital T through capital F dimension is the only pair of preferences which shows a sex trend from Myers, 1963, and is distributed equally in the general population from Bradway, 1964. People who use the F preference as the basis for decisions claim, at times, that capital T preference people are heartless, stony-hearted, have ice in their veins, are cold, remote, and intellectualizers who are without the milk of human kindness. On the other hand, the capital T preference people who use the impersonal principles as the basis for decisions may claim at times that the capital F people are too soft-hearted, unable to take a firm stand, incapable of standing up in the face of opposition. They're too emotional, They're illogical. They're fuzzy thinkers, intellectual dilettantes, and people who wear their hearts on their sleeves. Misunderstandings can occur when capital F and capital T people are expected to make decisions in an unnatural way, that is, in the mode which is not preferred, and therefore a way which is not the most comfortable. For example, a capital F wife might insist that her capital T husband let his feelings show, while he might wish she would be logical for once. Yet neither way of going about making decisions deserves degeneration from those with an opposing preference. People with a capital F preference may have an advantage over those with a capital T preference for developing the less desired preference. Formal schooling addresses the capital T areas far more than the capital F. Thus, those with a natural preference for capital F also tend to develop their capital T, while those with a natural preference for capital T do not have an equal opportunity to develop their capital F side, which may remain relatively primitive. Sometimes the feeling types are seen as more emotionally sensitive than the capital T people, but this is not the case in actuality. Excuse me. Wet my whistle. That's a lot of words. Okay. These sentences are very, very, very long. Okay, I'm just going to read the whole thing again. Sometimes feeling types are seen as more emotionally sensitive than the capital T people, but this is not the case in actuality. Both types can react emotionally with the same intensity. The capital F person, however, tends to make his emotional reactions more visible, and others may see him as warmer and capable of deeper feelings than a capital T person. When the capital F type does become emotional, when his hands become moist, when color flushes or drains from their face, when their body trembles, when their heart beats faster, and when conscious control of the body is lost, others are affected by this. Indeed, the emotional reactions of F people tend to be contagious and to generate heat. When the T person becomes emotional, however, the same body reactions are not as evident and therefore not as much noticed by others. Thus, capital T people are often described as cold and unemotional, while in reality they may be experiencing an intense emotion, as is a capital F person. Capital T person, in fact, sometimes seems embarrassed by a show of intense emotions, while the capital F person sometimes seems to enjoy the excessive show of feelings. Capital T versus capital F preference need not cause serious problems in interpersonal relations if the two different ways of going about making decisions are understood and appreciated. To be sure, this dimension can be complementary between two people in a way which the other preferences are not. The E versus the I dimensions and the N versus the S dimensions are apt to be more oppositional than supplemental. The F person needs a T person to present another point of view, and vice versa. Once an F person understands that a T person does have deep, though not always visible, emotions, and once a T person realizes that an F person can think logically, although he may not always verbalize his logic, misunderstandings between them are apt to dissipate. Q words. Persons who prefer impersonal choice as a way of making decisions, capital T people, tend to respond positively to such words as objective, principles, policy, laws, criteria, and firmness. while persons who choose in the context of the effects of the choice on themselves and others, F people, tend to react positively to words such as subjective, values, social values, extenuating circumstances, intimacy, and persuasion. Capital T people tend to use the impersonal approach, where capital F people choose to be more personal in dealing with people and projects. Capital T's like the sound of words such as justice, categories, standards, critique, analysis, allocation, while capital F's like the sound of words such as humane, harmony, good or bad, appreciate, sympathy, devotion. Capital T person tends to give priority to objective criteria and is apt to be good at argumentation, attempting to win people over to his point of view through logic rather than appealing to emotions. The capital F person tends to be good at persuasion and makes choices in the context of the personal impact of the decision on the people around him. All right, got one more section and I'm going to squeeze it in on this one. Judging versus perceiving. Question: do I prefer closure and the settling of things, or do I prefer to keep options open and fluid? Persons who choose closure over open options are likely to be the judging types. Persons preferring to keep things open and fluid are probably the perceiving types. The capital J is apt to report a sense of urgency until he has made a pending decision, and then be at rest once the decision has been made. The capital P person, in contrast, is more apt to experience resistance to making a decision, wishing that more data could be accumulated as the basis for the decision. As a result, when a capital P person makes a decision, he may have a feeling of uneasiness and restlessness, while the capital J person in the same situation may have a feeling of ease and satisfaction. Capital J's tend to establish deadlines and to take them seriously, expecting others to do the same. Capital P's may tend more to look upon deadlines as mere alarm clocks which buzz at a given time, easily turned off or ignored, while one catches an extra 40 winks, almost as if the deadline were used more as a signal to start than it is to complete a project. A curious phenomenon can sometimes be observed in capital P people who are responsible to their superiors for meeting deadlines, apparently not trusting subordinates to take deadlines seriously. The capital P person is likely to become anxious and to react by moving real deadlines ahead to artificial ones. The capital J person in the same situation is apt to communicate to his subordinates the actual deadlines set by his superiors and expects the deadlines to be met. The difference between capital J's and capital P's is easily observed, especially when the preference is extreme in either direction. Unfortunately, just what Jung meant by judgmental and perception was not at all clear. Judgment was meant to mean concluding, and perception was meant to mean becoming aware. But this definition was merely a substitution of controversial constructs with equally controversial ones. Fortunately, Jung's identification of observable differences in actions is independent of his speculation, so that the detection and description of types need not suffer in the least from these excursions. Sources of misunderstanding. There appears to be about as many capital J's as capital P's in the general population. Bradway, 1964. This preference can be a source of irritation in relationships because capital J's push toward decisions while capital P's hold out until there can be additional searches for data and perhaps more options. In addition, the meaning of the judging and perceiving concepts is vulnerable to misinterpretation. The term judging is often seen as judgmental and perceiving as meaning perceptive. Capital J people are no more judgmental than capital P people, and capital P people are no more perceptive than capital J people. A more useful distinction can be made by describing judging as desire or valuing of closure, and perception likewise as a desire or valuing of the open-ended. Apparently all capital J's, whether intuitive or sensible, thinking or feeling, introverted or extroverted, share an attitude towards work and play quite different from that of the capital P's. The judging types seem to have a work ethic such that work comes before all else. One's work must be done before one rests or plays. This outlook has marked effect on what capital J's are willing to do to get the job done. Capital J's will do all sorts of preparation, maintenance, and cleaning up afterwards, just because these are necessary. Not so with capital P's. Capital P's, on the other hand, whether intuitive or sensible, thinking or feeling, introverted or extroverted, seem to have a play ethic. Capital P's seem to be more playful and less serious than capital J's. The work doesn't have to be done before play or rest begins, and if the process of work is not directly instrumental, is mere preparation, maintenance, or cleanup, then the capital P may balk at doing it or find something else to do. Capital P's are much more insistent that capital J's that the work process is enjoyable. One might say that capital P's are process-oriented, while J's are outcome-oriented. At work especially, P's and J's can criticize each other. J people can be heard to describe P's as indecisive, procrastinating, foot-dragging, aimless, purposeless, resistive, critical, sophisticate, and blocking decisions. Capital P's may at times become impatient with J's because they feel pressured and hurried by what they view as the J's unnecessary urgency and unfortunate tendency to jump to conclusions. P's will occasionally claim that J's make hasty decisions and are driven and driving, are too task-oriented, are pressured and pressuring, rigid and inflexible, arbitrary, and premature in planning and deciding. Usually irritation by another's preference will dissipate when J and P behaviors are studied. Most people become fascinated and entertained by these differences, and with continued understanding, find it easy to make allowances for the other's way. The final part is cue words. Expressions which sound good to J people are words such as settled, decided, fixed, plan ahead, run one's life, closure, decision making, planned, completed, decisive, wrap it up, urgency deadlines, get the show on the road. What sounds good to P people are expressions such as pending, gather more data, flexible, adapt as you go, let life happen, keep options open, treasure hunting, open-ended, emergent, tentative, something will turn up, there is plenty of time, what deadline, let's wait and see. In summary, the four differences may be characterized by pairs of words and phrases. Let's try to show you this again. We've got some here. So this gives you some of what. And then the very back part of it right here. So you can see this.